You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat B'Shemesh Israel, 5776, 2016. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Devarim, and we're getting ready for Tisha B'av, the day that we commemorate the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem almost 2,000 years ago. And the question which I'd like to ask, I'm pretty sure I've asked it almost every year since I've started this. We're in year number 10. The question is, why is Parsha's Devarim placed right before Tisha B'av? What is the teaching? What can I learn from this week's Parsha that connects to the concept of Tisha B'av, to the destruction of the temple? And each year I have a new insight, a new idea to share with you. And of course, Baruch Hashem, thank God, I have an idea that I'd like to share with you this time as well. And it has to do with a beautiful medrash, which is right at the beginning of this week's Parsha. The verse tells us, Elah hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael. These are the words that Moses spoke to all of the people of Israel, Be'ever HaYarden, on the other side of the Jordan River, Ba'midbar, in the wilderness, Ba'arava, etc. The verse goes on and speaks about all of the things that he spoke, a long speech, which is basically the sefer of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. And what's remarkable, and the Medrash points out, is that if we look back to the beginning of the Shlichus, the beginning of God sending Moses to be his messenger, to take the Jewish people out, to redeem the Jewish people, and to bring them to the land of Israel, Moshe Rabbeinu refused. He felt he couldn't be the one to go and speak to Pharaoh and to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. On what grounds did he refuse? The verse tells us that Moshe said, I can't speak. Kvad peh. I'm somebody who, my mouth is heavy. Could be he was a stutterer, or could be he had a different issue with his tongue. We'll soon see perhaps. But he wasn't able to speak. Remarkable thing is that at the end of 40 years later, we have a speech which is perhaps one of the greatest speeches in history. Elah hadvarim. These are the words that Moses spoke. And he spoke these many, many words to the Jewish people. Flowing, beautiful speech. The question is, how did that happen? Moshe, who starts off unable to speak, unable to even speak to Moses and say, let my people go. Aaron has to be sent instead of him, or by his side. But it has to be sent instead of him as far as the speaking goes. Moshe Rabbeinu, by the time it gets to the end of this time, he's led the Jewish people for all of these years, he's able to speak. What changed? How did that change? How was he able to speak? So I'd like to share with you a remarkable medrash. And there's a beautiful depth, an amazing depth here. And it very much connects, and there's a beautiful lesson that's connected to Tisha B'av, to the destruction of the temple, what we're missing, what we had that we've lost, and we need to look forward to and pray that it gets returned. The Medrash says like this, Elah hadvarim. These are the words, halacha. Now the Medrash, as is its way, starts off with something which seems to be not connected so much. Halacha Adam Yisrael. The law is that if a person, is it permitted for a Jew to write a Torah scroll in any language? Does it have to specifically be written in Hebrew? The difference between the sefer Torah and tefillin and mezuzahs is that a sefer Torah can be written in any language, which is not true in regards to tefillin and mezuzah. Rabbi Gamliel says, Gamliel says, while it's true that a sefer Torah can be written in a different language, there's only one other language, and that is specifically Greek. The Medrash explains why is it that Rabbi Gamliel says that a Torah can be written in Greek. This is what our sages taught us. Bar Kapar says, the verse says, this is in Genesis chapter 9 verse 27, the blessing of Noach to his sons was that in regards to his son Yefes, so God should do good, should give beauty to Yefes, and God should place his dwelling in the tents of Shem. Shem's great-grandchildren were going to be the Jewish people, and the Jewish people would have the Mishkan, would have the tabernacle, would have the Beis HaMikdash, the temple. God's presence would reside in their midst. So what is the blessing that Noach gave to his son Yefes? The beauty, that there is something of Yefes that's going to be in the tents of Shem. The tents of Shem are a reference to the Jewish people's tents, where people learn Torah, where they study the Word of God. That Torah can be written even in the language, the beautiful language of Yefes. Yavan, the Greeks were descendants of Yefes, their beautiful language was allowed to be used to write a sefer Torah. When we read this medrash, we need to ask ourselves, try to understand, what is the significance of this? What does it matter if the Torah is written in a different language? Why would the Torah only need to be written in Hebrew? What is the depth of the fact that the Torah can be written in other languages according to the Chacham, according to the sages, and according to Rabbi Gamliel, it can at least be written in Greek? What is the idea here? What is the depth of what the medrash is trying to teach us? As we continue in the medrash, we're going to see that there's a beautiful depth, a great depth to it. The medrash continues. Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu. God says, Re'eh l'shana shel Torah, ma chaviva. See how beautiful the tongue of Torah, or the language of Torah is. Shemerapes haloshen. The power of the Torah is to cure the tongue. Now listen closely to this part, because this is the core of the idea I'd like to bring across. What is the idea of the fact that the Torah cures the tongue, takes away the illness of the tongue? How do I know indeed that it does this? Minayin shekain ksiv. We find that the verse says, it's a verse in Proverbs, chapter 15, verse 4. Marpe lashon eitz chaim. The tree of life has the ability to cure the tongue. Ve'ein eitz chaim ela Torah. We know that what is the tree of life? It's a reference to the Torah. Shenamar, as the verse says also in Proverbs, chapter 3, verse 18. Eitz chaim hi l'machazikim ba. The Torah is a tree of life to those who hold on to it. Now, the Medrash is going to give us two different proofs, two different places that we see that the power of the Torah is to cure the tongue. The Torah purifies and cures the tongue. And we'll see very soon what is that idea, what does it mean. But first see the two rayas, the two proofs of the Medrash, because they're very powerful and they're very foundational. Here's what the Medrash says. The tongue of Torah unties the binding of the tongue. How do you know that this is true? In the future time, God is going to cause these beautiful trees to grow in the Garden of Eden, or from the Garden of Eden. Umahu shivchan. What is the praise? What is so great about these beautiful trees? Why are they called beautiful and great? Shemerapin as they have this power to cure the tongue. How do we know this is true? The verse speaks, it's in Ezekiel chapter 47, verse 12. The verse there is speaking about a water, a fountain, a river that's coming out of Jerusalem, coming out of the place of the temple of the Beis HaMikdash. And on the edge, on the side, on each side of this river, of this flowing river which is coming from the temple, and there are going to be trees growing there. Now, what is the power of these trees, the fruits of these trees? How do we know it's something that cures the tongue? Shenemar, as the verse says, the verse there speaks of the fact that the trees will produce fruit that will be eaten, and the leaves will be something which is a cure. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shua ben Levi, what is the cure? So we have an argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and really they're saying two different possibilities or aspects of the same thing. One says that it's going to be used for medicinal purposes. The other one says no. Any person who is mute, unable to speak, and he takes some of those fruits, he eats those fruits, his tongue becomes cured. While he was unable to speak before, once he eats those fruits, he'll be able to speak. It will sharpen his ability to speak and give him great eloquence. Now, all we see in the verse is that it speaks about the water flowing out of the Beis HaMikdash, out of the temple. How do we know that it's talking about Divrei Torah, that words of Torah have the ability to cause someone to be able to speak again? So the Medrash says, B'divrei Torah, how do we know that this is speaking about words of Torah, this verse? Shekach ksiv mizeh u'mizeh. In the verse it speaks about the fact that these trees will grow on either side. And the language that it says is mizeh u'mizeh. Ve'mizeh u'mizeh l'Torah. We find that there's another place where the Torah uses the phrase mizeh u'mizeh, from this side and that side. And that's specifically in reference to the Ten Commandments, which represent the Torah. Shnemar, as the verse says in Exodus chapter 32, verse 15, mizeh u'mizeh hen ksuvim. The Torah was written, the Ten Commandments were written on both sides, which meant, as the Meforshim explain, as the commentators explain, that if you would look at one side of the tablets of the Ten Commandments, you would see the same thing as if you looked on the other side. Meaning, even though they were engraved, and they were engraved through and through, from one side to the other. So ordinarily, if you engrave from one side to the other, one side will be a mirror image of the other. The pasuk tells us, the verse tells us that that was not the case. That even though it was engraved through and through on both sides miraculously, you would see the same exact words written in the same exact direction. So we see from this verse that references the Torah as mizeh u'mizeh, from this side and that side, using the same language as we find in the verse in Ezekiel, speaking of the trees that are from this side and that side of the river. So we see that it's referring to Torah. The power of Torah is that it sweetens the tongue. It gives the tongue an ability to speak, whereas before it was unable to speak. Now, as we read this, we need to understand a few different things. What is the idea, again, of the fact that the Torah purifies a person's speech, makes a person able to speak? What does that mean exactly? Second of all, what does it mean that the Torah is written from this side and that side, it's the same? What is the depth of that idea? What is the depth of what Chazal, our sages, are trying to teach us? That the tablets, whether you looked at them from this side or that side, it looked the same. It was read equally well on both sides. What is the depth of that? Last point in the Medrash, final point. Rabbi Levi Amar, Rabbi Levi says, I don't need to teach you this idea that the Torah has the ability to give a person's speech from anywhere else. Let's learn it from right here. Ari Moshe, we see that Moses, before he had merited to receive the Torah, the verse says about him, also in Shemos in Exodus chapter 4 verse 10, I'm not someone who has the ability to speak. I can't talk. Once he merited to learn the Torah, to bring the Torah into the world, to bring this amazing spiritual revelation into the world, through him his tongue was cured. He began speaking many words. Previously it had been difficult for him to speak. Aaron had to speak in his place. Now that he had learned the Torah, now that he had given over the Torah to the Jewish people, he was able to speak the most eloquently. He said the greatest speech of all time. How do we know it's true? We see it from our concept, from our verse, which speaks of the words that Moses spoke to the Jewish people. And what did he say? What did he speak about? He spoke words of Torah. The words of Torah themselves purified his speech, gave him eloquence, took away his speech impediment, made it possible for him to have the most amazing oratory skills perhaps of anyone of all time. So we read this Medrash and we want to understand, what does it mean? How does the Torah have this ability to purify one's speech, to give a person the ability to speak eloquently? What is the depth of what this Medrash is coming to teach us? Now I'd like to share with you another Medrash. And this Medrash is way back at the very beginning. It's at the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, when he said to God, I can't speak. I'm not able to speak. I have a speech impediment. My mouth is heavy. That's the language that he used. How did this happen? Where did it come from? How did he lose his ability to speech? Was he born that way? The Medrash tells us no, he was not born that way. This is what the Medrash says. Moshe is gadol b'palter in Shaparo. Moses grew up in the palace of Pharaoh. Moses, as a child, did something very strange. He would grab Pharaoh's crown and he would throw it down to the earth. The king wanted to say that he should be liable for death. And his stargazers, the ones who had originally told him, watch out, there's going to be a child born to the Jewish people who's going to save them. They said to him, they said, this is the one we told you about. He's going to save the Jewish people. He's going to destroy your kingship. This that he's pulling off the crown from your head is not a coincidence. It signifies what he's going to do in the future. He's going to take away your kingship, your reign over the Jewish people. Paro didn't know what to do with this. Paro asked for advice from his wise men. Three of his main advisors were Jethro, Job, and Bilam. One said, look, he's obligated for death. You have to kill him. The other one said, look, he's just a child. He doesn't know what he's doing. How can you kill him? So they devised a plan. We're going to figure out what is going on here. So what did? They brought a plate. On that plate, they placed one golden coin, and they placed burning coal, both of which were shiny, but the burning coal was much more shiny. They said, if he takes the golden coin, we know that he's smart. He's doing things intentionally, and he's liable for death because clearly the child, Moses, is trying to say, I'm going to take away your crown, Pharaoh. and he means it. But if he takes the shinier thing, which is the coal, we know that he's not doing things because he's smart, because he has any intention. He's just a child. And then he will be free. He won't be liable for death. Now what happened was amazing. Moses, he really was a smart kid. He wanted to take the golden coin. A malach came, an angel came, pushed his hand over him. He took the burning hot coal, and he placed it into his mouth, as children often will take things that they find and place them in their mouth. As a result of placing the burning coal in his mouth, perhaps for a fraction of a second, it caused him to become unable to speak properly. Now, once again, as we read this medrash, we need to understand what is the medrash teaching us. The stories of the midrashim that we find it's not happenstance. It's not just like, oh, this is how it happened to be that he lost his ability to speak. It was very much connected to the fact that he was trying to steal or pull down the crown of Pharaoh. What is the depth of what this medrash is teaching us? So to begin to answer these questions, I want to come back to a question that we asked before, which had to do with the luchos. It had to do with the fact that the tablets of the law that had the 10 Commandments on them were written mizeh umizeh heim ksuvim, the verse tells us. The verse says that they were written on both sides. You could read them equally from both sides, even though the engraving went through from one side to the other, miraculously. What is the depth of the fact that that was true? What is the Torah teaching us by telling us that the tablets were read the same on both sides? So in looking at this verse, I found a Rabbeinu Bachai, which speaks about another aspect of mizeh umizeh, that there are two sides of the Torah. Both are equally important. What are the two sides of the Torah that are represented by the two sides of the 10 Commandments, of the tablets? The two sides are, we have a certain aspect of the Torah which is revealed, which is the Pasha Pshat, which is the simple understanding, which is the verses as we see them. And then we have an inner aspect, the other side of the Torah, so to speak, the inner side of the Torah, the depth of the Torah, the side, the secrets of the Torah, those wisdoms which are hidden inside of the simple understanding, inside of the way our Chazal teach us these ideas in sometimes fantastic stories. There's a depth here. There's something that needs to be unearthed, that needs to be found inside of the depth. So that's indicated by the fact that it says mizeh umizeh. There are two sides, there are two aspects of the Torah. Now, what's interesting, though, that Rabbeinu Bachai does not explain, is what does it mean that they're the same, that they're written the same? You can see the same thing on both sides. And I believe that the depth of what the Rabbeinu Bachai is teaching, and really the whole idea here, is that both sides, the outer aspect of the Torah and the inner aspect of the Torah, really are saying the same thing. The simple pshat, so to speak, the body of the Torah, the outer aspect of the Torah, what we see of the Torah, seems to say one thing. There's an angry God. There's a God. We've spoken about this idea. There's this is what happens if you don't keep the Torah, and etc. etc. But then there's an inner aspect, which is the love of Hashem, the love of God. What we see more as we learn machshava, we learn ideas of the Torah, the hashkafa of the Torah, the outlook of the Torah, the Kabbalah. As we see those inner aspects, we realize that there's an outer and an inner aspect, which seem to contradict. But the statement of mizeh umizeh heim ksuvim, the Torah is written really on two sides saying the same thing, read the same way. When you receive the Torah properly, when a person understands what the Torah is really saying, the depth of it, there's not really a contradiction to what's happening on the outside as opposed to what's happening on the inside. When a person has an inability to speak eloquently, when a person is an elam, he's a mute, does that mean that he's not thinking? Chas v'shalom, heaven forbid. That person is able to think, that person is able to perhaps even express himself beautifully inside of his mind. But when it comes to communicating to others, to externalizing that which is inside of himself, he's not able to do that. There's a contradiction between what's going on the outside, the way people perceive him, as opposed to what's going on the inside, the way he perceives himself, and the thoughts that he has. The world we live in, especially when we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, when we don't have a temple, the world that we live in is a world of duality, of contradiction. A person has a physical body, has physical needs, and they seem to contradict his spiritual needs. If a person wants to be spiritual, the natural way that a person might think to go is, I need to deny myself of the physical needs that I have, of my physical desires. That's the natural way of thinking. Is it possible to reconcile them? Is it possible to find that within the physical it's possible to be spiritual? Is it possible that these are just two sides of the same coin? The Torah says yes. The depth of the Torah, the water that comes out from the temple, resolves the duality, resolves the paradox of the physical and the spiritual realms, and says that there are really two aspects of one thing, even though they seem to be polar opposites. Can I say the Torah in a language which is not the Torah's language, which is not Hebrew? Hebrew is called Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language. Can I write a sefer Torah in a different language? Perhaps it's Greek, perhaps it's any language, but the answer is yes. Why? Because the Torah is marpei lashon. The Torah itself is something which expresses purification of the tongue. The tongue, what is the idea of the tongue? What is the idea of purification of the tongue? Like we said, the tongue is something which expresses that which is inside of me, my subconscious, that which I need to externalize. When I can't manifest what's really inside of me, that means I can't, that's expressed by Chazal as, I can't speak. Moshe Rabbeinu, his purpose is to be able to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. He knows that he can't do that. He can't manifest his purpose because he can't speak. How did that come about? Because he was already trying to manifest it a little bit early, perhaps, when he was a child. He was trying to take that crown off of Pharaoh, and he lost his ability to speak as a result of that. He lost his ability to manifest the potential that was inside of him. Because instead of taking that crown, instead of taking that gold, which represented his true purpose, which was indeed to bring down Pharaoh, instead he lost his ability to speak. He took that burning hot coal. But God himself restores that ability for him to be able to manifest what's inside of him, the potential inside of him. God says, go to Pharaoh. I want you to speak. Mi sampel Adam. Who is the one that gave a person the ability to speak and manifest that which is inside of him, the potential inside? How is it manifest? How does it become brought out? How does a person gain that ability to manifest who they really are? The Medrash is telling us it's through the Torah. The Torah resolves the seeming paradox between what's going on the outside, what's manifesting in the world, and what's going on the inside. On Tisha B'av, when it comes to this day which commemorates the destruction of the temple, we are mourning. What are we mourning? What are we crying about? Why are we sitting on the floor? We're not just crying about the fact that there's been so many pogroms and holocausts and destruction of the Jewish people. We're not just crying about a temple that was destroyed, a physical temple where we come and we pray. We're crying because there was something that happened in that temple. That temple was a place water would come out and will come out of that temple and resolve the duality. A person would walk into the temple, he would eat of the korbanos, he would eat of the sacrifices, something amazing would happen. Our sages teach us that when a person ate of the korbanos, of the sacrifices, of that meat, that the meat would be nivla b'meyav. It was just like the mun, the miraculous bread that they ate in the wilderness. The Jewish people never had to use the bathroom as long as they ate that. Because there was no duality, there was no refuse. When a person eats in the temple, a person eats the special meat that's brought there, there's no difference between the physical and the spiritual. The physical body completely consumes the food that's eaten. There's nothing left over. It's a place where everything is included in the service of God. Gold, silver, the animal kingdom, the melach, the mineral kingdom, the salt, all the different aspects of reality come and are joined together and aren't a contradiction to the spiritual realms. Without the Beis Hamikdash, without that temple, we're in a place of duality, where if I'm physical, I can't be spiritual. And if I'm spiritual, I can't be physical. I can't truly manifest who I am. I can't speak my mind. I am a spiritual mute. The power of the Torah is that it's marpei lashon. It cures my tongue. It cures my ability to manifest the potential which is inside of me and be able to bring it to the fore, to bring it out. It brings me to a place of Olam Haba, of the future time, of the days of the Messiah, of those times when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt. It's that time when the water comes out and it makes it possible. The water coming out from the temple makes it possible for the fruits to grow and for me to eat those fruits, internalizing it, and then all of a sudden my tongue is cured. I can manifest, I can express who I truly am on a spiritual level, and there's no contradiction between the subconscious and the conscious minds, between the physical and the spiritual realms. This is something that we actually see when a person makes a siyum, he completes a tractate of the Talmud. One of the special features of that siyum, of that completion ceremony, is that there's a kaddish, an unusual kaddish which is said, which speaks about the resurrection of the dead and the future time when the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, is going to be rebuilt. And why is that there? It's there because the Torah actually brings us to a place where I can go and be in the Beis HaMikdash. I can be in that place where there's no contradiction between the physical and the spiritual. And in fact, even during the 9 days, even during this time of mourning for the temple's destruction, if I make a siyum, if I complete a tractate of the Talmud, and I invite people to come, even though ordinarily I have to be in mourning and I'm not even allowed to eat meat, just like a mourner, because of the destruction of the temple. If I make a siyum, if I complete a tractate of the Talmud, it releases me from the mourning. I am no longer in a place where the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, where the temple is destroyed. I've re-entered into the temple. I'm back in the place where there is no more duality, where the same thing is read from either side, both the front and the back. The inner aspect and the outer aspect of the Torah are the same. I can see that they say the same thing, the spiritual and the physical. There's no contradiction between them. And isn't it beautiful that I can eat meat? I can now incorporate even the physical aspects of the world. My desire for meat, my desire to enjoy the things of this world, they become incorporated in to my spirituality because of the Torah, through the amazing spiritual teachings of the Torah. So I want to bless you, and please bless me back. Hashem should help us, that we should be able to experience, even now, even in the time of seeming destruction of the temple, we should be able to experience through the Torah a reinstatement of the temple, a falling away of the duality, a recognition that mizeh, both aspects of ourselves, all aspects of the world, truly are a unity, and all can serve as part of our service of God. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.